Hey, Jamie here, and welcome to part 1 of Module 8. We're continuing to make awesome progress. And so in Module 8, what we're going to talk about is how do you go about creating professional opportunities for yourself. So in part 1, we're going to introduce the 4 channels, but we're also going to primarily focus on channels 1 and 2 in this part, and then in part 2, we'll focus on channels 3 and 4. So we're going to understand what are the 4 channels for creating the career opportunities. We're going to understand how to prioritize the different channels and how to approach them. And then in this part 1, we're going to focus on channels 1 and 2, which are professional networking and digital applications. And then we're also going to understand, I'm going to introduce you to the concept of sustenance bridges and how to actually use a sustenance bridge in order to help you make more strategic decisions in your career. So the 4 channels for creating career opportunities for yourself is one, professional networking. And that's why in Module 7, we talk so heavily about professional networking, is that is the basis for creating opportunities for yourself. That is the major strategy. That's the most effective strategy. But then you have the second channel, which is online applications, digital applications. The third channel is directly reaching out to recruiters, so both corporate recruiters as well as what are called headhunters or third-party recruiters. And those are recruiters that work for staffing and recruiting agencies. So there's 2 types of recruiters, corporate and then headhunter. And then there's the 4th channel, which is creative means. And when we talk about that in part 2, there's so many different ways, depending on the industry, the position, etc. There's a million different ways that you could potentially create an opportunity for yourself. Now, in terms of energy allocation and focus, what are you focusing on most of the time? Professional networking should be the vast majority of your energy. That is the most effective strategy. It's the most effective channel, and we'll be breaking down why that is. So 80% of your energy is focused on networking. The other 20% of your energy should be focused on online applications, recruiter outreach, and other means. And really other means that's the last resort because it's also the most time intensive and energy intensive. So if you can create an opportunity for yourself with the first 3 options, that's going to be a lot easier and usually faster. Okay, so now how this all plays out. And really, this is kind of what I call the channel of applications or the channel of career opportunities, and it's kind of a triangle. So there's you, there's the companies, your target companies, and then there's going to be third-party recruiters. So the way that we can visualize these different channels is, well, channel number 1 is you're building relationships, strategic relationships with professionals inside of your target companies. Now, more often than not, those people are not going to be human resource professionals or recruiters or hiring managers, etc. So now, if you are recruiting for, or if you are networking for an HR position or a people operations position, well, yes, of course, then you're going to be networking with people within HR. But most of the time, other departments within the company, it's not. So you're building those relationships and they refer you to people within HR or within people ops. That's going to be, they're referring you to corporate recruiters. That's your primary strategy. But then there's going to be the second channel, which is online applications, which goes straight to the human resource professionals within your target companies. But then there's channel 3, which is also recruiting or using third-party recruiters and headhunters, as well as directly reaching out to via LinkedIn or via email to the corporate recruiters as well. So directly sending the messages, trying to get a phone call with them. And then the 4th is really not a part of this triangle, but other creative means for receiving an interview. So there's going to be 3 main things that you have to do simultaneously at the same time in order to advance your career. And the very first thing you're going to have to do, which we've already talked extensively about, is professional networking. Think of professional networking as a part-time job. It has to be done. It cannot be pushed to the side or procrastinated or only done 1 day a week. It's something that needs to be consistent. Again, you're building a fire. You're building this networking fire, and you're building it by reaching out to 10 people every day and getting calls, building relationships over time consistently. The second thing you're going to have to balance is personal development. So when you think about advancing your career, there's likely going to be skills or knowledge that you need to improve in order to improve the likelihood of your ability to outperform in the interview. or to improve your skills or knowledge that are relevant for the next step in your career. So you're always constantly improving yourself. And this is really what we focused on in Module 1 when we talked about strategic growth in the marketplace. How do you climb the economic value ladder and negotiate for the value that you believe that you're worth and consistently improve your personal value through creativity and then realizing that? The only way to do that is to improve yourself through reading books, taking online courses, working with other professionals, mentors, coaches, etc., constantly improving yourself. And then the third is interview prep. And you're constantly preparing for the interviews. So thinking through, and we'll talk about this in a later module extensively just on interview prep, but you're always allocating a little bit of time to perfecting the responses of how you're going to communicate about your past experiences, your past achievements, why you're interested in the next step, what your target position is, why the company, etc. That has to be ready to go. So eventually you're going to hit a point where you feel 80% ready to interview. And the reason you want to target 80% is you're never going to feel 100%. There's always something more you could learn. There's always more research you could do. There's always more people you could talk to. So the really good threshold you want to shoot for is you feel confident, you feel prepared, and you know that, all right, 80% of the interview, I'm going to be ready to crush. Then the other 20% confidence will carry you through. So then in terms of the 4 channels of opportunity, those channels are what are going to get you to the interview. Most of the time, getting the interview is the hardest part because in order to get the interview, you have to do the networking and as well as use the other, allocate 20% of energy to the other 3 channels. But you could do all the interview prep in the world, but if you don't do the networking to get the interview, it's all for nothing. It was all wasted time. So that's why you need to be balancing all 3 of these: networking, personal development, and interview prep. So when you actually get to the interview, you crush it. And then once you crush it, based on how well you do, you may actually allow yourself the opportunity to then negotiate the offer because you did so well and they want you so badly that you now have some leverage to negotiate a better offer. And then eventually you accept, and then that leads to your successful career advancement. So now let's talk about channels 1 and 2, which are networking, referrals, and digital applications. So you can think of these 2 as there's digital recruiting, and then there's what's called the shadow market. And the shadow market is networking. Digital recruiting is what most people think of when they think about getting a new job or pursuing a new opportunity at a company or some other industry, etc. They immediately go to job boards, online job boards like Indeed, LinkedIn, Glassdoor, Monster, ZipRecruiter, or even more niche job boards. And there's thousands of job boards where you can find positions. Now, the problem is that 20% of jobs are actually filled through job boards. 80% of professional positions are filled through networking. This goes completely against what most people believe and what they do. Most people spend the vast majority of their time and energy focusing on online applications when it's backwards. They're approaching it in a completely ineffective manner. Only 20% of positions are filled through online applications. So that means that they're competing against the vast majority of people for only 20% of the opportunities. There could not be a more competitive way to try to get a job. So most people don't even realize how badly they're shooting themselves in the foot by only focusing on online applications. But then knowing that 80% of positions are filled through networking and through internal referrals, well, also, most people don't network. Or if they do, they don't know how to do it effectively. Not nearly as effectively as you now have learned how to do. Build deep relationships, ask for advice, post, continue to build that relationship, and then eventually you stay top of mind when an opportunity arises. They offer to help you, or you reach out, ask for help, and they're willing to help you. So, knowing that, you're swimming in a blue ocean where there's very few other people competing because you have relationships that are the most hard. That's your competitive advantage. So why is this? Why are 80% of jobs filled through networking and only 20% online? And it's because of the intensity of the investment that the companies need to make for these different processes. So for online applications and digital recruiting, the company needs to have a hiring manager interview whoever the team leader is. So the internal lead, whether that's the marketing team lead, accounting, finance, or a product, or engineering team, whatever. So after they interview that person, learn, okay, what position is available? What are you looking for? What are the requirements that are necessary for the next hire? That hiring manager is then gonna have to write a job description. And then with that job description, they're also going to set up the ATS, which is the applicant tracking system. And that takes a lot of work. And then they're going to have to go through ATS filtering, which is automatically going to filter out thousands and filter through thousands of online applications. And the recruiter, whatever spits out, so let's say that the ATS, let's say 1,000 applications go through, maybe the ATS system automatically dumps 70%, so 700 resumes are just purged. Well, that still leaves 30% or 300. The recruiter then manually has to go through all of those to figure out who he or she wants to actually talk to. So then the recruiter is going to have to set up phone screens for applications or for applicants, and then eventually there's going to be the formal interview process, and then they'll extend an offer to who they believe is the top candidate. And then likely, or actually not likely, only fewer than 15% of people ever actually negotiate their offer. A lot of people leave a lot of money on the table. We'll talk about that as well, how to negotiate. But job offer, and then eventual, if there is a negotiation, that happens, and then eventual acceptance. So that's a long process for online applications. And when you see how short the process is for networking, you'll immediately understand why companies prefer it. So when it's networking or referral based, the manager of the team, so let's say the internal lead of the team, spins around in his or her chair and says, hey team, who do we know that would be a good fit for this open position? Well, all of a sudden those employees then refer people, and immediately the first 3 steps on the digital recruiting side are skipped. And it goes straight to a screening conversation with a recruiter. And then that screening conversation leads to formal interviews and eventually the job offer negotiation. So by skipping those first 3 steps, which are all of the setup, the interview, the writing, the job description, creating these long search queries for the applicant tracking system, and then having to filter through all, the hundreds of applications that did get through the screen, the company saves an enormous amount of time and money. And so because of that, that's why they primarily hire through referrals. 80% of professional positions are filled through networking. So, and these are just some stats that just take this point even further. So this is from the Society of HR Management, which surveyed more than 2,000 companies. The average cost of a hire is about $4,000, or some estimates are about 10% of annual salary. So if they're bringing someone on for $100,000 a year, that could be as much as $10,000 for that hiring process. Or if someone's a senior leader within the company and they're bringing someone on for $200,000 or $300,000, well, that's an expensive hiring process because there's going to be a lot of interviews. There's going to be tens, if not hundreds of hours of research internally within the company to figure out who the best applicant is to lead the company. So average for early to mid-career professionals in terms of a hiring process through online applications, it's more than a month long. So 42 days on average. And it's much harder to find a culture fit because resumes and online applications you can't find a culture fit from an online piece of paper. So then you have the shadow market through networking. So the benefits to the company are the company saves time and money. They fill the job significantly faster because they skip all the online stuff and they can just say, who do we know? Give me referrals. And it's easier to find a culture fit because if they have employees within the company who are top performing employees and people who obviously match the values and the core beliefs of a company, well, of course, those employees are most likely to refer people who also fit the culture because people like people who are like themselves. So the culture match is a lot better when it comes to referrals. And so because of that, most companies, and you may have actually, you may currently work at a company, or maybe you previously worked at a company that offered bonuses if you referred someone and they got hired. So that could be anywhere from 500 to 5,000. I've even heard of if you refer someone who is a very large hire within the company, sometimes the bonuses can be really large. And that's because the company knows how much time and energy and resources you save them. So, shadow market and networking is the most effective strategy. You want to reach out to your relationships and ask for help when you're about 80% ready to interview. And we also talked about at the end of Module 7, how do you actually go about reaching out to someone and asking for their help when you see an open position and you already have built the relationship. So I'm not going to go through this whole message again, but I just wanted to bring this up to remind you that we did discuss how to send that message. So now I want to go back to digital recruiting and break down what that actually looks like on the backside within a company. Because as the candidate, you don't really see what's going on behind the scenes, but it's important for you to understand what is going on. So we already talked about the process, and you can think of that in like three main chunks. So on the right side, you can see where it says Ats Filtering, and really all that is machine filtering. So if 1,000 people are applying online, that machine is scanning through all the applications, searching for keywords, phrases, and formatting, and it's using a search query that the hiring manager or whoever is leading the process, they're the ones who manually wrote those search queries. So that's going to lead to eventually spitting out X number of applicants that match the search query, and then the recruiter is going to have to manually review and go through all of those remaining applications. And I call that Superman scanning because they're only spending probably 6 to 10 seconds running through those. And then they're manually choosing the best, or at least what they believe to be the best, reading through those, and then deciding who are the X number of people that I actually want to set up an initial phone screen with for 10 to 15 minutes, and then decide who to move through to a formal interview process. So that's what that looks like. Now, in terms of the funnel, how an applicant tracking system works is they set up the ATS system, and then the ATS blasts out that post to multiple different job boards. So you may be on LinkedIn and see an open position, and maybe you see that, okay, it only says 80 people have applied or only 300 people have applied. Okay, that's not too bad. Well, that's only LinkedIn. That same job post has been posted on multiple other job boards. So you're never just competing with that number of people. You're really competing with everybody who's applied across 5 or 10 different job boards. There's always going to be hundreds, if not thousands of applications that you're competing with online. So that ATS is going to blast it out to Indeed, LinkedIn, Monster, ZipRecruiter, Glassdoor, and more. And then that's when those get submitted. The ATS is going to be filtering through all those using the search query. And then ultimately 200 or 300, so 20 to 30% might get through that search query. Then the recruiter is going to do the Superman scanning. Ultimately, they select 30 people, or these numbers are just as an example, but I want you to see how small of a number they're actually choosing when you're going through online applications. This is what it looks like behind the scenes in terms of numbers. So then maybe only 30 out of 1,000 or more applicants actually get an initial phone screen for 15 to 30 minutes, and maybe they only move 10 of those people into a formal interview process, and then they extend an offer to one person, to whoever interviewed the best. So it's if you think of 10 out of 1,000, that is a very small number. That's 1%. So when you go through online applications, it's extremely competitive. And this is how most people try to get jobs. It's ineffective, it's extremely competitive, and it's really stressful because you cannot build a competitive advantage. The only advantage you can have in this process is your written resume. So it's not your best bet. This is not your best channel. The best channel is through networking, through building strategic relationships. So the other thing I want to bring up is if you are applying online, and it is still one channel, it's kind of like playing a free lottery. You'd be crazy not to play. By no means am I dissuading you from applying for a position online, because it's a free lottery. If you get an interview, fantastic, but don't make that your primary strategy. You don't want to bet that that's how you're going to get the job. It's kind of a hedge. So you don't want to apply to more than one position at the same time at one company, because the recruiters are going to be managing more than just one open position. And usually they're hiring for multiple different positions within the same type of department. So one recruiter might be managing 15 or 30 different open positions for the engineering side of a company, or for the accounting and finance side of a company, or for the marketing side of a company, or for the operations side of a company. So if you're applying to 2 different marketing positions, or 2 different accounting positions, or 2 different operations positions, or 2 different engineering positions, or even worse, you're applying to an accounting position and then a marketing position, that recruiters are going to see both applications within the company. And immediately what that does is that raises the red flag in the recruiter's mind, because you're telling them, I don't know where I can add the most value. I don't know what I can offer as a valuable professional to your company. It shows the recruiter that you're confused and you don't know what you want. So you don't want to do that. Now, let's say you apply for one specific position and they say, thanks for your application. We decided to move on with other applicants. Okay, you've now been technically rejected for that position. Okay, if there's another position that you're interested in, now apply for that second position. But you want to wait until you've finished one full process for one position before you apply to a separate position or a different position at the same company. Okay, so best practices for digital applications is, one, if you are going to apply online, I always recommend go to the actual company website first, apply directly through their website. And then if you find that same job that same job posting across job boards, so LinkedIn, Indeed, Monster, ZipRecruiter, Glassdoor, and many more, I recommend finding that application on 3 or 4 different job boards and applying through all those separate job boards. So that way you're putting in 4 or 5 different applications into the process. Also, set online job alerts for your target companies and for your target positions. And the reason you want to set these online job alerts, and you can do this for every job board. So usually sometimes you need to create a profile, so that way you have to log in. But then once you've logged in and you've created a profile, you can set a job alert so that it sends you a text or an email whenever a new position has become available or been posted for your target companies or for the target position that you're shooting for. The reason you want that alert is the moment that you get that alert, you can then turn around and reach out to all of your relationships that you've built at that company and immediately inform them, hey, this opportunity just came up. I'm planning on applying. I'd love to ask for your advice. And you're using that outreach message asking for their help. So being noted immediately when a job has been posted is super important. And then lastly is always submit a cover letter for online applications. Some recruiters, some online application processes literally just filter by who has included a cover letter and who hasn't. So now that you have the cover letter template, you know how to write the cover letter. It should only take you at most maybe 15 to 30 minutes to put a cover letter together. And once you've already written one cover letter, it gets even faster. So it's not a huge time investment. And if you're going to apply online, you might as well increase your chances, include a cover letter. So, and the last point that I want to note is, again, don't stress too much about the ATS compliance. You've done your research, you understand your target audience, what they're looking for, you've analyzed your personal inventory, you've strategically positioned yourself, and then you've used all of that information to write a targeted and tailored resume, LinkedIn profile, and cover letter. You're already optimized, significantly better than other applicants, so don't stress too much about trying to fit the search queries. At that point, you're wasting time. Okay, so now I want to talk about what are called sustenance bridges, and why I believe that these are so important is they allow you to make more strategic decisions for your career based on the situation that you're currently in. And so as a metaphor, I use this simple story or example. So imagine you're hiking up the side of a mountain, and as you're pushing upwards for the next grab, your grip slips and you fall 15 feet before catching yourself. So while you're falling, you gouge your left leg and you're now bleeding pretty badly. You know you need to hike back down. What do? Well, there's really only two options. One is either you continue walking and you get up and immediately start hiking back down, or two is you stop the bleeding. And the best way to make sure that you're going to make it all the way down the mountain without bleeding out is you need to stop the bleeding. So before you continue hiking, you stop the bleeding. After that bleeding is stopped, you stand up and then you hike down the rest of the mountain. So your job, your career is very similar. You need to have sustenance first before you ever try to obtain something else. So sustenance is the maintaining of someone or something in life or existence. So where you currently are right now in your professional career is you're in one of three scenarios. You either have a job, you recently quit your job, or you lost your job. Now, one is not better than the other. They're just different scenarios. So don't judge yourself based on if you quit your job or lost your job or were fired or were laid off, etc. Just, the scenario you're in right now is the scenario you're in. Let's focus. Let's keep moving forward. Okay. So now, depending on what scenario you're in, your career transition will look different. Because in some of these scenarios, you're bleeding. And if you are bleeding, the question is, how bad is the bleeding? And how much longer can you go? And the bleeding in this case is cash. If you don't have a job, if you're not earning an income, you're bleeding cash. You're either bleeding savings or even worse, you're dipping into retirement account, whether that's a 401k or an IRA. You're taking money out and paying that 10% penalty, and then you're living off of that. Both cases you're bleeding, and you don't want to be having to dip into your retirement accounts. Okay, so if you have a job, you're not bleeding, and there's no immediate cash flow problem. So you're receiving a paycheck to live on, and you're able to pay for your cost of living, food, rent, or mortgage payment, your insurance, etc. You have time both before and after work to work on your career advancement as well as weekends. So your time is limited, but in terms of cash flow, you're covered. You're not bleeding cash. You have an extended time frame for your career transition because you don't have, I'm going to run out of cash in 2 months or a year. So you have an extended period or time horizon to make the transition. And it's really a want to advance the career sooner rather than later. Now, if you don't have a job, so you either quit or you lost your job, you're bleeding because you're not earning income and you're using cash that you've either saved or invested. And the question is it an immediate problem or do you have time? So you don't have a paycheck coming in. You're paying for living with either your savings or retirement funds, and you have all 7 days available to advance your career because you're not working full time. And you do have time pressure for your career advancement. So if you're in this scenario of you don't currently have a job, you must do one of the following based on your bleeding. You either focus 100% on advancing your career, and this is assuming that you do have some time before you bleed out, or two, if you're really nervous about bleeding out, you don't have time, you don't have the cash, you need income now, you need to build what I call a sustenance bridge. So sustenance, think of that as the very bottom tier of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which we'd covered literally in the very first video of Module 1. So sustenance is our ability to survive, our ability to live, to pay the bills, to eat, to have shelter. The moment that that's threatened, it's really hard to think strategically about 3 months from now, 6 months from now, 12 months from now, let alone 3 years from now. None of that even matters if you're not going to make it there, or at least you feel like you're not going to make it there. So sustenance must come first. And you can think of that as why, whenever we're on an airplane, if they say oxygen mask may fall in the case of depressurized, if the cabin's depressurized, put your mask on first, and only then, after your mask is on, should you help other people. And the reason for that is if the cabin depressurizes and you pass out, you can't help your kids. You can't help anyone around you. Because you can't take care of yourself, you're no longer able to take care of anyone else. So your career is the exact same way. You first need to make sure that you are solid. You're taking care of your deepest personal needs first, And only after those needs are taken care of do you then want to strategically think about, okay, how do I want to advance my career? So if you're bleeding cash and you don't have time, you got to stop the bleeding. You must stop the bleeding. So there's two different scenarios that I want to run through. So if today you don't currently have a job, scenario one is you're bleeding, but it's not an immediate problem. Maybe you have savings for 8 months or 12 months or 2 years. So in that case, you have plenty of time. You're not worried about whether or not you're going to be able to pay your bills and keep the lights on. But what I do recommend is set a deadline. Set a deadline for when, if I don't have a job by this point, if I haven't advanced my career how I want to, by this point, I will build a sustenance bridge. And you want to set that deadline for 2 months until you run out of cash. So if you believe that, okay, I can pay for my cost of living for 12 months, your deadline is 10 months from now. If I have not advanced my career by within 10 months, I'm building a sustenance bridge. And only after I've built that sustenance bridge will I then continue. So while you're not worried about, or while you have this time, you're 100% focused on advancing your career, because you're not going to stop the bleeding until you make that career advancement. So eventually you will advance your career. So this is scenario number one. The bleeding is not an immediate problem and you have time. So in this case, you want to set a deadline, which we already talked about. Do not go into debt. So be willing to accept a job that's not perfect but will sustain you. Do not go into debt. Some people will literally pull out credit cards that have 0% APR for 12 months or for 9 months, etc. And then they build up credit card debt. If that explodes on you, the way that the 0% APR credit cards work is if you build up that debt load for 9 months or 12 months, a lot of people think that, oh, well, I'll start paying interest, when it, on month 13. And then I'll start accruing from there. No. It blows up on you. So if you built up, $5,000 or $10,000 of credit card debt, as if you have that balance on your credit card 12 months from now, and then you pass the deadline for paying that off, what the credit card companies do is they retrospectively apply the full APR percentage to the past year. So if you have $10,000 and you don't pay that off and it blows up and you expire the 0% APR period, you wake up one day with $2,500 more dollars in debt, or 23% or 20% or whatever your APR is, it explodes. So I do not recommend going into debt in order to pay for your cost of living so that you can continue to pursue the career advancement. You don't want to go into debt. Okay. I know I beat that like a dead horse, but it's so important. I don't do that. Okay. So now job scenario number two, if you don't have a job and you don't have savings, you don't have time to pursue it without income, what you're going to have to do is stop the bleeding. And what I mean by stop the bleeding is your situation's not sustainable. You need to build a sustenance bridge, which is taking the job that is soonest and most available to you to pay the bills. Now, is that what you want to do? No. Because nobody wants to take a job that they don't like. Nobody wants to take a job that's below their means. But if you can't pay the bills, you need to. It's sustenance. Don't let your ego get in the way. Once you have that sustenance bridge and you can support yourself, well, now you can then focus in the mornings, in the evenings, and on the weekends to focus on your career advancement and balance the three things: your networking, your personal development, and your interview prep. And then eventually advance your career from there. So if you do have a job, you're already in that situation. So you can focus in the mornings, in the evenings, and on the weekends. Okay. So does a sustenance bridge define your career? Absolutely not. It does not. So a lot of people will not take a position because they know that they're better than that position. That harms them because they're not willing to do what's necessary in the short term to achieve the long term. Will your sustenance position boss be upset if you leave after 1 to 3 months? Yes. I would be very upset if I was a manager and I hired someone and they left after 2 months. But if that's the case, if that's what you need to do to build a sustenance bridge, you take a position knowing that you're probably only going to be there for a month or 2 months or 3 months. until you network, you get the opportunity with your targeted position or targeted companies, you interview and then get the job. Once you get that job, you might be out of the sustenance position in 2 months, in 3 months. Is that boss going to be pissed? Absolutely, because that they're like, we just finished training you and now you're going to leave. That's okay. Remember, this is your life. It's your career. You cannot make a decision based on what other people want. You need to do what's best for you. You are a service provider and you are in the business of you. Your life, your career. Yes, express, your dreams to this person, or maybe not express your dreams, but if you were to sit down with that manager and express, hey, I was able to get my dream job and the opportunity presented itself. I interviewed, I got the position I've been shooting for months. And because of that, I've taken that position and I'm putting in my 2 weeks notice or my 1 week notice. Will that person be upset in the moment? Yes. But will they actually respect you more as an individual? Absolutely. Because they're probably, if anything, they go, good for this person for pursuing what they actually want. A lot of people don't even do that. So yes, it's going to be painful for them in the short term, but I promise you it is the best decision. So if you're not pursuing your dreams and goals, you're fulfilling someone else's. And the quote I always refer back to is the Jim Rohn quote, where he says, if you're not creating a plan for yourself and fulfilling that plan, I'm paraphrasing here, but if you haven't created a life plan for you and you're fulfilling that plan, it means that you're in someone else's plan and they don't have a whole lot planned for you, because people always care more about their own careers first. So always put yourself, and remember that you are a business. You need to do what's best for you. Okay, so when in a sustenance position, you're still doing the 3 advancement activities. You're doing your professional networking, you're doing your personal development, and you're doing your interview prep. But because you're in a sustenance position, you're going to need to be doing these in the mornings, in the evenings, and also on the weekends, because you might be working full time. Okay, so that's what I've got for you for this part 1, where we covered the difference between online applications and networking and the advantages of both, and how networking should be 80% of your focus, because it's the most effective, the most efficient, and it's also, in terms of the company and for you, it's the best culture fit. So in part 2, what we're going to focus on are channels 3 and 4. So channel 3 is talking about recruiter outreach, and then channel 4 is creative means. So I will see you in part 2.